Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. Today, we're going to explore the parts of speech. This is the first slide, and I'm excited to take you through what promises to be an engaging journey into language. We'll cover the main parts of speech that make up our sentences, helping you understand how words work together. So, let's get started and have some fun learning about the building blocks of language. Let's take a look at the contents of today's presentation. We start with an overview of the parts of speech, which form the foundation of understanding how words function in sentences. Moving on, we focus on nouns, including their classification into proper and common nouns, as well as countable and uncountable types. We'll explore different kinds of pronouns, such as personal, possessive, reflexive, indefinite, and demonstrative pronouns, highlighting how they replace nouns to make our speech more efficient. Next, we'll examine adjectives, including superlative and comparing adjectives, and how they describe or modify nouns. We'll also look at adverbs, their types, and how they add detail to verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs, including place and frequency adverbs. Further, we'll delve into conjunctions, coordinating, subordinating, and correlative, to understand how they connect parts of sentences, along with prepositions that show relationships between words. We'll also cover verbs, distinguishing between linking, main, transitive, and intransitive verbs, and look at phrasal verbs as common expressions. Finally, we'll touch on interjections, which add emotion or emphasis, and wrap up with a review of how all these elements come together to form clear, effective communication. This comprehensive overview will help you grasp the key concepts and see how each part of speech contributes to language mastery. Today, we're going to take a closer look at the overview of parts of speech. In English, there are mainly 8 parts of speech that help us understand how words function in sentences. These are nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, conjunctions, interjections, and prepositions. What's interesting is that parts of speech are identified more by their role or place in the sentence rather than by their specific meanings. This means that a word's function is what really defines its part of speech. Recognizing this can really help us better understand sentence structure and improve our language skills overall. So, as we go through each part, keep in mind how they fit into the bigger picture of effective communication. Now, let's talk about nouns. A noun is essentially a word that names a person, a place, a thing, or even an idea. They are the building blocks of sentences because they often serve as the subject, the main focus of what we're talking about. For example, you might have a noun like a teacher, which tells us who is involved, or consider the word love, which is an idea or emotion that can be expressed as a noun. Other examples include a lion, which is an animal, or a proper noun like Ali, which refers to a specific person. Recognizing nouns helps us understand the structure of sentences and how ideas and objects are connected. Remember, nouns are central because they anchor the sentence's meaning, making it clear who or what we're discussing. So whether it's a person, a place, a thing, or an idea, nouns are the foundation of clear communication. Now let's talk about the classification of nouns. Nouns can be either singular or plural, which is an important distinction to understand. Singular nouns refer to just one person, place, thing, or idea. For example, you might say an apple, the car, or a table. These all point to a single item. On the other hand, plural nouns refer to 2 or more of the same kind. So you could have pencils, chairs, or tables. Recognizing whether a noun is singular or plural helps us communicate clearly and accurately, especially when we're talking about quantities or amounts. This is a fundamental part of understanding how nouns function within sentences, and it ties into the overall theme of how we classify and use different types of words in English. Now, let's move on to proper and common nouns. Proper nouns are specific names of persons, places, things, or ideas. For example, we have Holy Quran, Lahore, and Minari, Pakistan. These are always capitalized because they refer to particular entities. On the other hand, common nouns are general names like cat, pencil, or paper. These are not capitalized unless they start a sentence. The key point here is that proper nouns give us specific information and should always be capitalized, while common nouns are more general and follow the usual rules of capitalization. Understanding this helps us write and speak more clearly, especially when we want to emphasize the specific or general nature of what we're talking about. This distinction is essential for good grammar and effective communication. Now let's talk about collective nouns. These are a special kind of nouns that, grammatically, are considered singular, but they actually refer to a group of people, animals, or things. The key idea here is that even though they are singular in form, they represent a collection working together as one unit. For example, words like family or herd. When we say the family is coming over, we're treating the group as a single entity. Similarly, herd refers to a group of animals, but we still use it as a singular noun. Other examples include class, which can mean the entire group of students, and team, which is a single unit made up of multiple members. Recognizing these helps us understand how to use verbs correctly and how to think about groups in a sentence. So remember, collective nouns emphasize the unity of the group, even though they include multiple members. This concept ties into our overall theme of understanding how nouns function in different contexts. Now let's talk about countable and uncountable nouns. Countable nouns are those that you can actually count individually. For example, think of things like bottles. You can have 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles, and so on. These are easy to quantify. On the other hand, uncountable nouns are a bit different. They refer to things that cannot be counted one by one in a straightforward way. For instance, water, you don't usually say 1 water or 2 waters in the same way. It's more about the substance or mass. Other examples include eggs and sand. While you can count eggs individually, sand itself is a mass that you measure in volume or weight, not by counting each grain. Recognizing whether a noun is countable or uncountable helps us use the right articles and quantifiers, which is essential for clear and correct communication. This distinction ties into our overall goal of mastering proper noun usage in English. Now let's talk about the difference between concrete and abstract nouns. Concrete nouns are things you can actually touch or see, they're tangible. Think of people, places, and objects like a person, a court, a pencil, a hand, or a piece of paper. These are all concrete because you can experience them with your senses. On the other hand, abstract nouns are a bit more intangible. They represent ideas, feelings, or concepts that you can't physically touch. For example, air, justice, safety, democracy, faith, and religion. These are all things that exist in our minds or in societal understanding, but you can't hold them in your hand. Understanding these differences helps us see how language captures both the physical world and the ideas that shape our thoughts and society. It's an important part of mastering how we communicate clearly and effectively. So on this slide, we're talking about nouns as gerunds. A gerund is basically the ing form of a verb, but what's interesting is that it functions as a noun in a sentence. For example, take the sentence, "Running is good for you." Here, running isn't just a verb, it acts as the subject of the sentence. It's the noun or gerund that we're focusing on. Another example is "My crying upset her." In this case, crying is the subject. It's the thing that's doing the action of upsetting her. Notice how the gerund crying is serving as a noun here, even though it's derived from the verb to cry. The key takeaway is that gerunds allow us to turn actions into things or concepts we can talk about as nouns. And understanding this helps us see how verbs can function in different ways within a sentence, which is really important as we explore how nouns and other parts of speech work together. Now let's talk about pronouns. A pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun. Its main purpose is to help us avoid repeating the same nouns over and over again, making our sentences clearer and more natural. For example, instead of saying Hina talked to Hina's child, which sounds a bit awkward and repetitive, we can simply say Hina talked to her child. Here, the word her is a pronoun. It replaces Hina and makes the sentence flow better. So the key idea is that pronouns help us rename or stand in for nouns, which keeps our language smooth and easy to follow. This is especially important as we build more complex sentences and want to avoid sounding repetitive. It's a small word, but it plays a big role in effective communication. Now let's take a closer look at the different types of pronouns, starting with personal pronouns. These are the words we use to refer to specific people or things in our sentences. Personal pronouns are quite versatile because they can act as subjects, objects, or possessives, depending on their role in the sentence. For example, in the sentence, I like apples, I is the subject. In she saw me is the object. And in that book is mine shows possession. It's also important to note that personal pronouns can be singular or plural. Singular pronouns refer to one person or thing like I, me, you, she, her, he, him, and it. When we're talking about more than one, we use plural pronouns like we, us, you, they, and them. Understanding these distinctions helps us communicate clearly and accurately, which ties back to our overall goal of mastering effective language use. So, whether you're describing one person or a group, choosing the right pronoun is key to making your message clear. Now let's talk about possessive and reflexive pronouns. Possessive pronouns are used to show ownership or something belonging to someone. For example, words like my, mine, your, yours, his, hers, its, ours, and theirs all serve this purpose. They help us indicate who owns what in a sentence. On the other hand, reflexive pronouns are a bit different. They refer back to the subject of the sentence, meaning the person or thing doing the action is also the one receiving it. For example, myself, yourself, himself, herself, itself, ourselves, yourselves. To see how this works, consider the sentence. Ahmed congratulated himself on his good grades. Here, Ahmed is doing the action of congratulating, and he's also the one receiving the congratulations, so we use himself. Both types of pronouns are important because they help us clarify relationships between people and things, making our communication more precise. And connecting this to the overall theme, understanding these pronouns helps us communicate ownership and actions clearly, which is essential for effective language use. Now let's talk about intensive and reciprocal pronouns. Intensive pronouns are used to add emphasis to a noun or another pronoun. For example, words like myself, himself, yourself, herself, and themselves. Imagine I say, I saw Imran Khan himself in the ground. The word himself here emphasizes that I saw Imran Khan personally, not someone else. It highlights the subject. On the other hand, reciprocal pronouns express actions or feelings that are shared between two or more people. The most common reciprocal pronouns are each other and one another. For example, when I say, Maria and Saba help each other in their homework, it shows that they are helping one another, sharing the effort. These types of pronouns are important because they help us make our sentences clearer and more expressive, especially when we want to emphasize a point or describe shared actions. Understanding how to use intensive and reciprocal pronouns correctly will definitely improve your communication skills and make your sentences more precise, fitting nicely into the overall theme of mastering different types of pronouns for effective expression. Let's take a closer look at indefinite and demonstrative pronouns. Indefinite pronouns are used when we're talking about nonspecific people or things. For example, words like all, another, other, anyone, both, and each. These pronouns help us refer to something without pinpointing exactly who or what it is. For instance, in the sentence, nobody knows where the pencil is. The word nobody is an indefinite pronoun because it refers to an unspecified person. Now, moving on to demonstrative pronouns. These are a bit different because they function as noun markers. They point directly towards specific nouns, helping us clarify what we're talking about. For example, when I say, that woman attends the party, the word that is a demonstrative pronoun pointing to a particular woman. Similarly, in this is a wonderful story, the word this points to a specific story. Understanding the distinction between these two types of pronouns is important because it enhances our ability to communicate clearly and precisely. It also ties into the overall theme of mastering pronoun usage to improve our language skills. So, in summary, indefinite pronouns refer to nonspecific entities, while demonstrative pronouns are used to point out specific nouns. All right, let's talk about interrogative and relative pronouns. Interrogative pronouns are used to introduce questions. For example, if you want to ask who is going on vacation, you start with who. These words help us gather information by asking questions. On the other hand, Relative pronouns connect parts of a sentence and refer back to a noun or pronoun that we've already mentioned. Common relative pronouns are who, whoever, whom, that, whose, and which. For instance, take the sentence, "The English that we learn in class will help us pass the exam." Here, that is the relative pronoun, linking the clause about what we learn to the main sentence. Understanding these pronouns is important because they help us form clearer questions and more complex sentences, which is key to mastering English. This knowledge will definitely help us throughout the course and on the exam. Now let's talk about adjectives. An adjective is a word that modifies or describes a noun or pronoun. It's the word that gives us more detail about the person, place, or thing we're talking about. In English, adjectives usually come before the noun they describe. For example, in the sentence, "The smart student earned an A," the word smart is the adjective that describes the student. But adjectives can also come after linking verbs, which connect the subject to a description or a state of being. For instance, in "I feel happy," the word happy is an adjective that follows the linking verb feel, giving us more information about how I feel. Understanding where and how adjectives are used helps us create clearer, more descriptive sentences, which ties into the overall theme of mastering language and communication. Now let's talk about comparing adjectives. When we want to compare two things, adjectives are very useful. For adjectives that have one or two syllables, we add "er" at the end. For example, we can say greater, faster, or longer. These forms help us clearly show which thing has more of a certain quality. But when adjectives are longer than two syllables, we don't add "er." Instead, we use the word more before the adjective. For example, "He was more intelligent than his sister." This rule keeps our comparisons clear and natural sounding. Remember, these rules help us make comparisons smoothly, which is really important when we're describing differences or preferences. Keeping these in mind will help you communicate more effectively in English, especially when making comparisons in everyday conversations or writing. Now, let's look at how adjectives can be used as superlatives to compare more than two things. When we're talking about the highest degree of equality, we often add "s" to adjectives that have one or two syllables. For example, words like loud, cool, or smart become loudest, coolest, and smartest. These are easy to form and very common in everyday speech. But what if the adjective is longer with 3 or more syllables? In that case, we don't add "est." Instead, we use the word "most" before the adjective. For example, instead of saying "the most smartest," we say "the most intelligent." This is important because it helps us clearly express the superlative form and compare more than two things effectively. For instance, "She is the most intelligent girl in the class." This structure makes it clear that she has the highest level of intelligence among her peers. Understanding how to form superlatives correctly is key to making your descriptions more precise and impactful, which ties back to our overall theme of effective communication. Let's take a closer look at some irregular adjectives and their forms. As you can see in the table, many adjectives follow regular patterns, but there are some that are quite unique. For example, the adjective bad changes to worse when comparing two things and worst when comparing 3 or more. Similarly, good becomes better and best. Now notice that for little, the comparative is less, and the superlative is least. But for words like much and many, we also use more and most to compare two or more things. The key point here is that these irregular forms don't follow the typical "er" or "est" endings. Instead, they have special forms that you need to memorize. Recognizing these irregular forms is essential because they frequently appear in everyday language and can sometimes trip up even advanced learners. Remember, these irregular adjectives connect directly to our overall theme of mastering the nuances of English, especially when it comes to making comparisons. So, paying attention to these forms will significantly improve your fluency and accuracy. Let's take a closer look at how adjectives are arranged when describing nouns in a sentence. In this slide, we see an example table that demonstrates the typical order of multiple adjectives. When you have 3 or more adjectives describing a noun, there is a preferred sequence to follow. It generally starts with determiners or opinion words, then moves to size, age, color, origin, material, and finally the noun itself. For example, in the phrase, the pretty big new blue bag, notice how the adjectives are ordered. First the determiner, the, then the opinion pretty, followed by size big, then age new, and color blue. This sequence helps your descriptions sound natural and clear. Another example from the table is my precious small ancient black Chinese silk scarf. Here, the adjectives follow the same order, giving a smooth and logical flow to the description. Understanding this arrangement is crucial because it ensures your descriptions are grammatically correct and easy for others to understand. It also helps maintain consistency and clarity in your communication, especially when describing complex objects with multiple qualities. So, whenever you're describing something with several adjectives, remember this order: opinion, size, age, color, origin, material, and noun. Following this sequence will make your description sound more natural and professional. Let's talk about adverbs. An adverb is a word that modifies or describes an action verb, an adjective, or another adverb. For example, in the sentence, the teacher carefully graded the homework. The word carefully is an adverb because it describes how the teacher graded. It's important to remember that adverbs can give us more detail about how, when, where, or to what extent something happens. Now, a common mistake is thinking that after linking verbs like be, seem, or become, you should use an adverb. But actually, you need an adjective there, not an adverb. For instance, you would say, the teacher is careful, not the teacher is carefully. The adjective careful describes the teacher, which is the subject linked by the verb is. So, to connect this back to our overall theme of sentence clarity and correctness, using the right word in the right place, whether an adjective or an adverb, is key to making your meaning clear. Now let's take a closer look at the different types of adverbs. First, we have adverbs of manner, which tell us how an action happens or will happen. For example, if I say, she speaks loudly, the adverb loudly describes how she is speaking. Similarly, he was driving slowly shows us the manner of his driving. These adverbs give us a clear picture of the way something is done. Next, we have adverbs of time, which tell us about when the action takes place. For instance, I will buy a computer tomorrow indicates the time of the action. Or if I say, do it now, the adverb now emphasizes that the action should be done immediately. Understanding these types of adverbs helps us add more detail and clarity to our sentences, making our communication more precise and effective. Recognizing whether an adverb describes how or when something happens is key to using them correctly and enhancing our overall language skills. Today, I want to talk about two important types of adverbs that help us describe actions more precisely: adverbs of place and adverbs of frequency. Adverbs of place tell us where the action happens. For example, if I say, he will come here, the word here shows the location. Similarly, she went upstairs indicates the direction or place where she went. These adverbs help us visualize the scene better and give more details about the action's location. On the other hand, adverbs of frequency tell us how often something occurs. For example, he goes to school daily shows that going to school happens every day. And when I say, he is always late for school, the word always emphasizes that this is a very regular occurrence. Understanding these adverbs is key because they add clarity and richness to our sentences. They connect to the overall theme of how we can make our communication more specific and detailed. By using place and frequency adverbs effectively, we bring more precision and context to our stories and descriptions. All right, let's talk about conjunctions. Think of them as the Scotch tape of the grammatical world. They're the little connectors that hold words and phrases together, making our sentences flow smoothly. Without conjunctions, our language would feel choppy and disjointed. There are three main types of conjunctions I want to highlight today. First, we have coordinating conjunctions. These are the most common and include words like and, but, or, nor for so and yet. They connect equal parts like two words, two phrases, or two clauses, making the sentence more cohesive. Next, we have correlative conjunctions. These work in pairs to link similar elements. Think of pairs like either, or neither, nor both, and not only, but also. They help emphasize a relationship or choice within the sentence. Finally, there are subordinating conjunctions. These introduce dependent or subordinate clauses, such as because, although, since, or unless. They add depth and detail to our sentences, showing cause, contrast, or condition. Remember, understanding these types of conjunctions is key because they act like the glue that holds our ideas together, ensuring our communication is clear and connected. This all ties back to the theme of mastering grammar as a foundation for effective expression. Now let's talk about coordinating conjunctions. These are a special group of 7 words that connect parts of sentences together smoothly. The words are for and nor, but, or, yet, and so. You can remember them easily with the acronym FANBOYS. For example, Fahad likes to eat, but Zohaib prefers to play. Notice how the conjunction, but links 2 different ideas. Coordinating conjunctions are important because they help us combine thoughts logically and make our sentences more fluid. Throughout this presentation, we've been focusing on how to build clear, effective sentences, and mastering these conjunctions is key to that. So, keep the FANBOYS in mind. They're your go-to tools for joining ideas effortlessly. Now let's talk about correlative conjunctions. These are special because they join ideas in pairs, working together to connect parts of a sentence smoothly. Some common examples include both, and, neither, nor, whether, or either, or, and not only, but also. For instance, imagine saying, "Not only am I happy about the grades, but I am also excited that you are learning." Here, the 2 ideas are linked by the pair not only, but also, emphasizing both feelings at once. The key takeaway is that correlative conjunctions help us add emphasis or balance to our sentences by pairing ideas clearly. They fit into our overall theme of improving sentence structure and making our writing more cohesive. Remember, using them correctly can really enhance the flow and clarity of your communication. Now let's talk about subordinating conjunctions. These are words that connect an independent clause, which can stand alone as a sentence, with a subordinate clause, which cannot stand alone. Essentially, they show the relationship between the 2 parts of the sentence. For example, words like after, although, as if, because, before, even if, even before, if, since, and unless are all subordinating conjunctions. For instance, in the sentence, although the students were tired, they still came to class. The word although introduces the subordinate clause and shows a contrast with the main idea. The key point here is that these conjunctions help us create complex sentences, which add depth and detail to our writing. Remember, understanding how to use subordinating conjunctions correctly helps us connect ideas smoothly and clearly, which ties back to our overall goal of effective communication. So, keep an eye on these words. They're essential tools in your writing toolkit. Interjections are those little words we use to show our feelings or reactions in a moment. They're like quick bursts of emotion that come out naturally. For example, you might say, "oh," when you're surprised, or "wow," when something impresses you. If you get hurt, you might say, "ouch," or when you make a mistake, "oops." Sometimes we call out to someone with "hey" to get their attention. Most of the time, you'll find interjections in spoken English rather than formal writing. They help express emotion instantly and make our conversations feel more lively and real. Throughout this presentation, we're exploring different ways to communicate effectively, and understanding interjections is key because they add color and emotion to our speech. Remember, they're simple but powerful tools to convey how we feel in the moment. Prepositions are really interesting words because, like conjunctions, they serve as connectors in sentences. They link a noun or pronoun to another part of the sentence, helping us understand relationships such as location, direction, or time. For example, words like about, before, down, into, through, above, behind, and during. These are all prepositions. They tell us where something is or when something happens. You'll also notice prepositions like, to, across, below, except, toward, after, and beneath. These all help us clarify relationships between different elements in a sentence. For instance, when we say the book is on the table, On is the preposition that shows the relationship between the book and the table. Prepositions are essential because they add clarity and detail, making our communication more precise. Remember, understanding prepositions helps us craft clearer sentences and improves our overall language skills, which is key as we work on building effective communication for any purpose. Let's talk about verbs, which are essential because they usually express action or a state of being. Verbs can be classified in several ways. For example, there are action verbs, which show us what someone or something is doing. Examples of action verbs include he runs or he plays. These are straightforward because they clearly describe an activity. Then there are linking verbs, which connect the subject to a description or a state, like he is happy. We also have main verbs, which carry the main meaning in a sentence, and auxiliary verbs, which help form different tenses or moods, like he is running. Verbs can also be categorized as transitive or intransitive. Transitive verbs require an object to complete their meaning, like she reads a book, whereas intransitive verbs do not need an object, as in he sleeps. Lastly, we have phrasal verbs, which combine a verb with one or more particles, creating new meanings, like look up or give in. Understanding these classifications helps us grasp how verbs function and how they fit into the overall structure of sentences. Now let's talk about linking and main verbs. Linking verbs are special because they connect the subject of a sentence to an adjective that describes it. For example, in the sentence, butterfly is beautiful, the word is links the subject butterfly to the adjective beautiful. It helps us understand more about the subject. On the other hand, main verbs are those that can stand alone and carry the action or the main idea of the sentence. Think of words like run, eat, or work. These are action words that tell us what someone or something is doing. Then we have auxiliary verbs, which are also called helping verbs. These support the main verbs and help us form different tenses or moods. Common auxiliary verbs include have, has, had, do, does, did, be, am, is, are, was, were, been, being, and also modal verbs like should, could, would, will, might, can, may, must, ought to, and shall. The key takeaway here is that linking verbs connect subjects to descriptions, main verbs express the core action, and auxiliary verbs help us build more complex verb forms. Understanding these helps us see how sentences are structured and how meaning is conveyed clearly and accurately. This is all part of mastering how to use verbs effectively in our language. Now let's look at transitive and intransitive verbs. Transitive verbs are those that need a direct object to make sense. For example, when I say Shahir takes medicine for his headache, the word takes is a transitive verb because it requires medicine to complete the idea. Without the object, the sentence wouldn't be clear. On the other hand, intransitive verbs don't need a direct object at all. For instance, when I say Hanzala swims, there's no need for anything else to make that sentence complete. The verb swims stands alone and conveys a full idea. Now let's talk about phrasal verbs. These are made up of a verb plus a preposition, like look up or give in. The preposition changes or adds to the meaning of the original verb, so understanding these combinations is really important for grasping the full context of what someone is saying. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding the difference between these types of verbs helps us communicate more clearly and accurately in English, whether we're writing or speaking. It also enhances our ability to interpret different sentence structures and meanings effectively. Now let's look at some examples of phrasal verbs. For instance, the verb look by itself can mean to direct your eyes at something. But when we add up to form look up, it takes on a different meaning, like searching for information or checking a word in a dictionary. This highlights how phrasal verbs can change the meaning of the base verb significantly. Throughout this presentation, we've seen that understanding these variations is key to mastering more natural and nuanced English. Recognizing how different particles modify the core verb helps us communicate more clearly and effectively. Thank you so much for your consideration. I truly appreciate your time and attention throughout this presentation. I hope the insights shared today have been helpful and have given you a clear understanding of the key concepts and strategies we've discussed. Remember, the ideas we've explored are all about creating value, fostering innovation, and driving success together. If you have any questions or would like to discuss further, please feel free to reach out. Thanks again for being such an engaged audience. I look forward to the possibility of working together and making great things happen.